Like Dante's Inferno? Does Garfield in Paradise make you smile? What about Joe versus the volcano? What about Pompeii? What about the volcano? If any of these movies appeal to you, this adventure is for you. Today we're visiting Mount St Helens and checking out all the action. But before we do that, let me show you what happened a little bit earlier in this day to get here. Hey adventurers from Washington, we are on our way to Mount St Helens and made a pit stop. So let's roll the intro and get right to this adventure. Something I'm noticing about Washington is a lot of the different locations you can visit require the Discover Pass. So boy, oh boy, am I happy that I got one. I've already been to like 10 different places that I couldn't have been without the Discover Pass. Guys, it starts here. This is what first drew me in, was this sign very clearly marking the property. But then you have this amazing stonework right here, which is gorgeous. Sometimes, guys, it pays to stop. This sign right here says this is listed on the National Historic Registry for unique places of historic significance. That was a mouthful, but I'm about to find out why. There are 3 little signs right here that tell us a little bit more about the site, and then you can go and look at the site itself. Okay, so we got the scoop. According to this was one of the first homes that was created in this area by a Euro-American. So most of this area was inhabited by Native Americans, and so this was one of the first homes. It says north of the Columbia River. So this is really significant, guys. It's not just a random cabin in the woods. It's just not. It has actual significance. It went on to become a gathering place and later was preserved as a courthouse slash park. That's pretty epic, and it's really interesting to see the evolution of one building and one person's family home and how it turned into such a pivotal point in this area. Now let's see what it shows inside if we can. Oh, there it is. It's always harder to see in these kind of buildings because they're not lit and the glass is super reflective. I absolutely love stops like this because I don't have the most knowledge about like the Washington Territory area, and so I don't know the history of the land and which parts have more significance and how they were discovered. Normally my knowledge is pretty much based to the parks that I go to, and so seeing places like this is really cool, especially for a person like myself. I can come here and get this great piece of knowledge and a new little brain wrinkle and understand kind of what I'm looking at as I drive through the countryside versus it just being roadside. Okay adventurers, we have arrived at Mount St Helens Visitor Center. Now for those who've been living under a rock and don't know what Mount St Helens is, it's an active volcano here in the US. Its last official eruption was in 2008. Naturally I thought let's come check it out because that sounds real smart. But it is a part of the National Park Service and they have a really cool visitor center from what I've been told. So we're gonna go check that out and then see what there is to do while visiting Mount St Helens. I remember seeing a documentary about Mount St Helens like a long time ago and just thinking it was so cool that it was actually in the United States. I was always obsessed with Pompeii and so I always wondered if that could have been the case with Mount St Helens as well. Anyway, so clearly it's not, and I have an overactive imagination, but we're here, so let's see what it is. Okay guys, so it's $5 to enter as an adult, and then you can come into this really cool center and find out more and then determine what you want to do. There's several different things around the monument that we can do, so I'm really eager to step down here and learn. Guys, look. Let's go here. Look at all of these around us. It is crazy because we only think of this as Mount St Helens. I never have thought about all of these other ones. This is them up close. this section of the museum, you can walk through the timeline, and this shows you what from spring all the way up to summer of 1980 looked like through a lot of different photos and descriptors. So I think we're gonna cruise through that and see what it looked like. Wow guys, right here it says 123 years of quiet is the equivalent to 5 minutes in our typical 24-hour day. That's insane. So I wasn't quite yet born in 1980, so all of this is before me, which makes it even more fascinating because it was just like a little bit before me. It looks so beautiful. It's so serene there. It says here that there was an earthquake that was actually recorded, and that was the first main sign of that there was going to be an eruption. And if you'll recall, we went to Earthquake Lake, and that was in the 50s, so this is in the 80s. 30 years later, they have a little bit better detection and can deduce more from this. So this is what it started to look like. So we went from this over here, which was serene and beautiful, to this, which looks very menacing. And as you'll notice, it shows that there's a crater that formed, and that's where this happened. So it shares here that there were 2 different zones that were kind of rationed off. There were the blue zone and the red zone. No one except for scientists could go into the red zone, because that was the most likely impacted from the volcano. The blue zone was the area that was between 3 and 10 miles out from the red zone, so that people who lived in the area could still get a permit to go home, and loggers could still maintain business. But just outside of that, tourists everywhere. Guys, it says here anyone who lived in the red zone was able to go in once to get their things, but they had to sign releases, be escorted, and look at this. This is how much things have changed. This is a timeline of what happened, so you can see they're all time-stamped. What a difference 5 minutes. 5 minutes can make. Down here we're in a cross section of what it might look like if you were to go through Mount St Helens and check out the layers. It's really interesting, and then they also have these photos along the wall to show you a little bit more. Look guys, this is a comparison. So this would be what Mount St Helens looked like in the 80s. That's compared to the 1883 of this one. And then even bigger here in 1912. This is from Alaska. And then this is Crater Lake in Oregon. Wow. Now along this trip we will be going to Crater Lake after we get into Oregon, so that's going to be really interesting to compare as well. Now for everybody who's watching the video at home, you're probably thinking, okay, well that happened in Washington, it does not impact me whatsoever. Wrong. The ash from Mount St Helens actually went worldwide, and even though it was just a sprinkling across the globe, it still affects us today by how it sprinkled and completely changed our air. Okay, so that was the first of 3 visitor centers, and the reason why it costs $5 to get in is because this one is actually maintained by the state. This is not covered through your Discover Pass, nor is it covered through your America the Beautiful Pass. However, the others are. So $5 to get a wonderful education to start our trip, a map, postcards. We're on our way. I found it really fascinating while watching the video that it said that some of the people who lived in the area weren't able to access their home except for by that guided motorcade, and then whenever they started to go in, they had scheduled on the day of the blast for there to be a second motorcade. Can you imagine being one of those people to find out that you could have gone in and died? Like, that's so traumatic. there is a viewpoint that you can actually see the bridge that they had to reconstruct. They didn't know where to start or what they needed to do, but the world was completely cut off on this side from the other side that goes toward the mountain. Okay, so guys, according to this, we are now 14.8 miles away from the crater and on the westernmost boundary of the blast zone. The bridge itself is one of several bridges they had to reconstruct to get from point A to point B along to Mount St Helens. It is 2,340 feet long and sits 370 feet off of the ground. So pretty massively tall. They built it extra tall though because of the 200-foot water wave which went through this area. So they wanted to make sure that they elevated the road high enough to possibly safeguard it against future destruction and to allow people to have access to the other side. So now guys, we're gonna drive over the bridge, all 2,300 feet of it. Our next stop is the Forest Learning Center and Viewpoint. First up guys, we had perfect timing. Look at this. We are here with 26 seconds to spare. Let's go watch the video. Wow, so the video in this area is actually set up to show you what it was like when it actually just erupted. And this room is really hard to tell, but it looks like the force of disaster. There's a car that's flipped on its side. You sit on these logs that are covered in this ash. It's really incredible. And then that moves right into here with a similar theming. This is crazy, guys. This was a car that they found after the blast. See how mangled this was? And this is when cars were still made of metal instead of more so plastic. It's crazy. Wow. For those of us who are in our mid-30s, I want to say late 20s to mid-30s, the devastation of this area was very similar to that of 9/11, and that's something that you can think of by seeing and referencing on like TV and then in your brain. There was such destruction, and the cloud smoke was the same, and things were buried and you couldn't get to them, and that's what I would equate it to for people who weren't alive during this. Now, for those who are younger and didn't even experience that, there's no way to compare it to anything that's happened in recent years. There's just not. We've seen hurricanes and tsunamis and things like that, but they all have very different destruction than something like this. And it's just really hard to understand, and that's why it's important to come to places like this, because it puts it into a real perspective for every age, not just people who experienced it. Yeah. Wow. These people here actually survived the blast, and their accounts are below. Something very scary was actually the process of cleaning up, because they wanted to start the process so that things could move forward, but they didn't know if it was going to erupt again. And so they were taking a lot of different precautions with each and every process. And this wasn't something that was carried out in a short amount of time. It took a very, very long time to clear roads that were still existing, to build new bridges, to move trees, to find things that were missing, and in many cases they never did. But this display shows a few of the ways that they did start that process. People had to wear respirators, and they actually had these little walkie-talkies that was the sound that they made, but it was able to locate people just in case. See, this shows kind of the process. They had to repair the roads so that they could actually access those areas, build bridges one by one to get into certain areas. Additional rains caused more flooding and more damage, and eventually it led to damage along 16 miles of railroad even. You can see here that even the largest of equipment was mangled by the blast. And as a result of them finally being able to access it, over 600 loads of logs per day were removed from the area. That's a lot of logs, guys. Now, this is where we are right now, and this was in the blowdown zone. It also was a part of the landslide, so things were just wiped out in this area completely. And when we go outside, I'll show you what they look like now. This display shows that they actually had to replant the forest altogether, and they had to figure out what would grow best. So they tried several different methods. They tried digging down to the natural dirt and also in the ash. So you can see the difference. Here's the dirt, there's the ash. Now it says here that trees planted in the ash didn't have enough nutrients, so they wouldn't survive. So the trees that were in the dirt had plenty of water and were able to survive without being choked out. So all of the trees that we see today are a result of hard work getting to this stage. Let's go get in this helicopter and see what our view looks like. Okay guys, we're in the helicopter and I can see in front of me all of this different area that we're supposed to be flying over, as well as an aerial view of what I would see if I was moving at a rapid pace. Let's go in here. Discovery rooms are always so fun because they're hands-on, so you can see a variety of different things and learn based on what you're interested in. A second video. This one is about the forests, and this entire exhibit goes along with it. So it tells you about the animals you might find, the plants that you might find, and then it has some first-hand accounts by some people who are active in the forest of this area. Okay guys, this is from the blast. Ooh, it's so soft. It's like talc. Yeah. Ooh, but it's great. Okay, so we picked up some more information about our location and we're about to go check out this view. Now remember how I showed you that it was completely destroyed? We were in the blast zone. There was nothing that was left. Just period. It was all... So as you can see by this landscape now, the low-lying area still is cut pretty much by where the spew came out and destroyed and leveled and left its residue. But you can see around us, the trees have been replanted, there's tons of regrowth, and we're looking at between a 30 and 40-year-old forest right now. Okay guys, we stopped off at this stop off, which is just a little scenic turnout, but today is a perfect day for us to stop off and see this because it's so gorgeous. Look at this, guys. This is the valley that was swept by all of the volcanic action. So gorgeous, and as you can see, the clouds are starting to lift. We're being able to see the top of the peaks. Wow, let's get a little closer. Look at this. It's almost strange to see as you drive through because there's an awkward uniformity amongst the trees because they were all replanted. And so you find trees that are all similar height, color, and shape, and they're literally planted in many times almost in straight lines, which is bizarre to see in a forest. So normally you would look at that and think of only orchards and things like that that are planted in lines, but nope, some of these are too. See what I'm talking about, guys? Straight lines of trees. Odd. Okay, we just made the turn off to go to the Johnston Ridge Observatory, which is the main area that we're really excited to go to. We're about 8 miles away according to this, so this is going to be a little bit more twisty and turny, but I am so ready. We're getting close to the observatory and there is another overlook, and this one I had to stop at because the view is amazing. Wow guys, this is an amazing view. You can see where the landslide just wiped its way down and all of this area was cut and channels were created, and you can see where there still looks to be ash-ridden areas, that there's no growth or trees. And then this entire zone on this side and then also this side was directly in the blast zone. So the trees here are just destroyed still. So this area right here, they said was growing 5 feet a day before the blast. And then all of a sudden, the whole side of the mountain just went. And whenever it did, everything came down. The site is such an intense site. Like, you come here and you expect it to look like just a volcano like you create in science class, that's brown and no big deal, and you put some baking soda and peroxide in it, and but then you see it in real life and you realize that there's much more than just the magma. It affects everything. Landslides, floods, blasted trees, so much. It's impossible to fully understand how the volcano actually works until you see one like this and you're like, wow, okay, this makes more sense as to why some of the places I go look the way they do now. It's very intense and it's so cool, for lack of other word, because there is no word for this one. It's just amazing. The parking lot is packed. I wouldn't expect anything less. Yeah, I am gonna get out the bigger camera lens because I want to make sure I get lots of photos, and I'll post all of those over on my website. Fun fact guys, did you know that volcanoes were named after the Greek god Vulcan? Yeah, they totally were, just saying. Okay guys, so this particular stop is covered by your National Park Pass. So if you have it, you can get yourself and up to 4 individuals in, versus having to buy an individual pass for each person, which can quickly add up. So I am now in this area, which has another museum. We're gonna check that out and then go and check out the views. This one is supposed to be the most complete of the information because it's going to tell us about the earthquakes, the geology, everything. Down this hall there is a theater and the next showing is in 25 minutes, so we're going to have to remember that and not be going too far. Other than that though, you can see there's this beautiful forest scene that goes all down this side and shows us some of the different creatures that you might find in this area. This center, they have things about the more recent earthquakes and activity that has been going on and how they monitor it, and there's some really compelling photos right here that I'm about to show you about things as recent as 2004 to 2008. That's a little too close for comfort considering we're like not that far from the volcano. This was before. There's this huge chunk right here. After, this is all broken up and gone, and it looks completely different inside. Look at this, September 23rd, just chilling, no big deal. October 1st. So just 7 days later, it looks like this. That's crazy. This is more about that. See how it's, you know, a little bit of activity, but nothing really. And then a lot more. Again, look at this, it's just constant activity right there. Another constant activity burst there. This went on for days, guys. These 2 station areas are areas for observation, and it shows the readings from those up to date. So you can see this is today. There's movement, but it's nothing crazy. But if you look at this one, there's a lot more activity in this one. And that is the one that's considered to be the sugar bowl. like a few minutes watching it. It shows all the various vantage points and also time lapse of some of the areas. So you can see all of the different variations of activity, and then you can push all of these different buttons and it tells you more about those specifically, which is really, really, really cool. Like, look at that. Wow. There's so much that goes into this, well beyond what we will ever comprehend just visiting. It's intense, it's crazy, and it's much more than just a ranger talk or a place that's just, oh okay, ho-hum, just a normal dead site. No, this is an active, living, breathing thing that changes daily. Every single day is a new experience. Are we older than the rocks? So this one is from 1981, this one's from 2006. So are you older than either one of these? This story specifically resonates with me as a tent camper. These people were at their campsite, just hanging out, doing normal things like normal people do whenever the blast happened, and they were able to evacuate and go to a hunting shelter where they sat in complete darkness hearing these terrifying sounds, but they were spared because a mountain in front of them actually caught the blast, and even though there was a lot of things going on around them, they themselves were not injured. How fast was it? Was it breaking the sound barrier? No, it didn't break the sound barrier, but it was as harsh as an F5 tornado or a Category 5 hurricane. So a volcano more harsh than a hurricane, more harsh than a tornado, and completely and totally just as much so, if not more so, destructive to an area. Wow. These guys are some of the monitoring tools that they use currently. Look at this. A GPS antenna, a radio antenna, a lightning detector. This houses the computer equipment. And then over here, wow, this shows that the blast in 2005 actually melted the cables, rendering this piece not able to be used anymore.
Remember folks, no matter where you are, only you can prevent forest fires.
The doors have opened. We can go and watch the video. So the video was A1. It talked about how life returned back to the mountain following the big blast of 1980. But now that we have seen that, I think that we are full well prepared to check out this view. And it looks like the wrapping of a ranger program, so let's see if we can learn.
Have their own living laboratory. Can you imagine filling out the grant paperwork, going, okay, I have this awesome idea. I'm gonna take an area about the size of Chicago, half the size of Rome-ish, in case the grant person hasn't, been to Chicago, because I have not. Sterilize the ground, and part of it, just totally neutralize it. Nothing.
Wow, guys, the viewpoint here is to die for, so you have to come to this one and check it out for sure. Brr. Okay, it's starting to get a little cold. All this cloud coverage is nice as long as it's not raining, but the sun isn't getting through, so we're gonna take this tiny little hike, then go to the car, crank up the heater. Yeah. So this flower actually paved the way for other plants to grow in this area because it's very hardy.
the and baby burn, disco inferno, burn. Magma.